Hi, thanks for joining us today for some conversations that matter. If you've got some time, the next 30 minutes is a conversation with Chip Munn, who will help you understand things about finances and dealing with money, especially during this time when we've all had some struggles with issues with that because of the COVID virus and the social distancing and the economy downturning and all. He will help you with that. At the end, he's got some information that he's willing to share. I will put the information about it. I'll put it down in the comments below, so that if you want to contact him and get the information from him, he'll be glad to do that. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Well, hello. I'm glad you're with us today. I'm getting a chance to have another conversation that matters today with my friend Chip Munn. Chip is the CEO and one of the co-founders of Signature Wealth. He's from Pamplico. He lives here in Florence and is a big man in our community, a good guy. He and his wife Trish have 4 boys that they're raising together and having a wonderful time with it. I've asked Chip to come on to talk to us a little bit about finances. One of the things that's been hitting a lot of people during this COVID time has been handling their finances at home and not being prepared for when something like this comes along and maybe your income's cut back. Chip knows a whole lot about budgeting and about caring for your money and using that. So I'm so glad he's here with us. Chip, glad you're here with us. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you, Mike. I appreciate the opportunity to be on with you. It's always good to talk to you. And in terms of me, I'm a former 6th grade school teacher turned financial advisor. Back in the late 90s, I decided I didn't want to teach school anymore. And based on some family experience that we had with some, I'll call it poor planning. My grandfather's estate plan was, it's mine until I die, and then it'll be yours, and then you can worry about it. And so that led me to have an interest in helping other people not deal with some of the things that my family had. And so I ended up in this business, have been here in Florence for the last 22 years. We've been able to build a practice that just helps people. Our mission is to help people plan their future with confidence. And frankly, that's something that I think that people need right now, confidence.
Confidence? Well, good. That's what's going to ask you about that. Many families have been affected by this current COVID-19 time. And what kind of financial effect do you think it's had on people?
Well, I would say, Mike, that the first and kind of the biggest effect on all people is uncertainty. So right now, everybody, regardless of your financial station, has dealt with a form of uncertainty, whether that is in budgeting, in looking at your retirement plan or your retirement plans and your investment values. There's been a lot of uncertainty lately. And so I think that that's something that has impacted everybody. Now, beyond that, this is one of the weird times, probably kind of living history in terms of, this is one of the first times that, at least that I've been alive, where everybody in the world is experiencing this at the same time. That's one of the really odd things. So if we've ever looked for a time to be able to come together and to understand one another, this is definitely one of those. But the uncertainty then kind of, it affects people differently. So you have people who are living on a fixed income, and that can be nerve-wracking in terms of, the bills don't keep coming just because you can't go outside, or in some cases you can't go to work. And so I certainly have seen it play out really kind of in 2 tiers for those who are not working, in that they have finished kind of their career. There's that big fear of, do I have enough? So they're dealing with kind of wrapping their arms around, do I have enough? Because the scariest day of any person's adult life is the day that their last earned paycheck clears the bank. And now you're just your own faith for sure that what you've planned for is going to work. And then the other one is kind of that working family who either is somebody's been furloughed. We've dealt with a lot of that. laid off, or there's just the uncertainty around kind of as things reopen, what life's going to look like. And I think there's a lot of that. So it really touches, honestly, it's touched everybody in a meaningful way.
Yeah. Well, some of the families that have been really hit by this have been suddenly found themselves hit by debt, huge, more debt than they were ever used to, more debt than they planned on. What kind of advice would you give people who are struggling right now with debt?
So if you're already dealing with debt, one of the first things that I would do right now, if your situation has changed, is to reach out to and honestly, really probably even if it hadn't, there's no harm in reaching out to the lenders and having a conversation with them about your situation. Yeah. What we see now is really that spirit of everybody. Every commercial that we see right now is, we're in this together and we're here for you and all those things. And that's true. My experience has been that companies want to work with you now more than ever, because this is when, frankly, there's an old Tracy Lawrence song, Mike, you find out who your friends are. When it comes to folks like your banker, your financial advisor, your any kind of counselor, this is one of those times where you find out who your friends are, and the same is true for your lenders. And so I think that this is a time where, ultimately they just want people to pay them back. And so for them, restructuring terms or having a conversation or deferring a payment is it's something they're doing a lot of these days because they have to. And so they'd much rather you call them than to end up in a situation where they have to call you. The other advice that I would have is, to the extent that you can, there are a lot of kind of, whether they're laws or rules, it doesn't really matter, but there's a lot of stuff going on about people who will allow you to defer payments. Make sure you understand the terms of that, because some folks that I've seen, they'll allow you to defer the payments, but then they all come due at the end, and you just have to be careful with that. In some cases, that still makes sense, because maybe you have an opportunity to do some freelancing, pick up some odd jobs. Maybe you have an opportunity to go back to work if you were laid off. But you at least want to, know your numbers and understand kind of what the terms are on the front end of those things. You don't want to end up in worse shape than you were already in. Yeah.
I know that when people hit times like this and the debt begins to build up, one of the things that's hardest for them to do is to call folks. They tend to withdraw rather than to call up and say, look, things have changed, my job been cut back or whatever. And it is the best thing to be on the proactive end of that, to call.
For sure. Because if they have to chase you, or if you ever ended up in a situation with a collection agency, things like that, I mean, it can have longer term damage on things like your credit. And again, the worst thing that they can say is no. And so calling and having a conversation, at least for the person on the other end of the phone, shows a willingness on your part to try to repay them. And I think that that's step one. Again, if you look at it from the bank or the credit cards company's point of view, they'd much rather work with somebody who's actively trying to stay, on track with them, rather than spend time or money chasing after you. So I think that's definitely an important thing to remember. It's humbling. It's hard. I get that. I mean, any of these kinds of conversations can be difficult. Being a financial advisor is a little bit like being a doctor, where you ask somebody to come in and financially disrobe and have a conversation about, I make a living asking uncomfortable questions. But I think that this is a time where if folks would just realize they're not the only one, they are not alone. There are a lot of, I think, I forget the most recent number, 30 million people, whatever it is, that are out of work in our country right now. You're not the only one. And what better time to be having these conversations, frankly, than in a time where you got no need to be embarrassed or ashamed, because a lot of these things, are through no fault of your own. And I think that what it does do, Mike, is gives folks, you mentioned unprepared. It gives folks an opportunity that as they kind of figure things out and work through and restructure things, to really build the potential for a better future by making good decisions now.
Speaking of unprepared and getting prepared, some have begun talking to me. People have been asking me questions about emergency funds. How much should I put aside whenever I get the chance to start building up again, and when we get through this and my work is better, and how much should I put aside for a future emergency if this comes back again or something else happens? Do you have any advice on that, on a percentage or an amount or a time limit or anything like that?
So I'm gonna give you two answers. One is kind of more standard, and then the other one is a little more open-ended. So first, we have to point out there's a difference between fixed mandatory expenses and discretionary spending. Mm-hmm. So there's a difference, we'll say, between needs and wants. Yeah. Now it's neither my place nor yours to determine what falls into which category for anybody. So this is a no judgment zone as far as that's concerned. General advice, and what I would recommend is, there are a lot of people, Mike, who say 3 months to 6 months salary. And I think that's a good range. But what I would point out is that it's less about the salary and more about the necessary expenses. So in an ideal world, if you could be between 3 and 6, and I would say 6, but I understand that for a lot of people, just having, the average American family doesn't have $500 put away. It is a disproportionate situation. But if you think about it right now, if you could weather 3 months of your necessities, I think that a lot of folks would take comfort in that. So I think that I would, if I were setting a beginner target, first, anything that you save is a step in the right direction, because it's money you're not going to have to borrow or deal with later. You're prepared in advance. In an ideal world, you want to have, in my mind, again, that 3 to 6, but it's not necessarily of your income. It's of the things that you have to pay for. Yeah. And there's a difference. One of the ways that you can get a look at that, Mike, is, and I encourage people, it's one of the first things that I did personally when all of this kind of started several months ago, is what I call kind of an audit, and just going through and looking at, all industries now have us conditioned to pay monthly subscriptions. A lot of times, Mike, I'm ashamed to say that the first time I ever did this audit, I found 2 gym memberships, neither of which I was using. Yeah. So, it can be a substantial amount of money that we've signed up for various services that we aren't even using anymore. So by going through and auditing that, one of the first things you can do is cut out expenses that you didn't even use. So it doesn't even hurt. Now, if you're in a place where you could then divert that into a savings, then you can see how you could build up kind of the emergency fund over a little period of time. But the first thing is going through and cutting out those things that we pay. Again, we have a monthly car wash bill. Well, we don't anymore. But I mean, we've been conditioned. We can be in the car wash club, or any of those kinds of things. So going through and cutting those either out or down is one way to kind of begin moving in that direction. So the second answer, though, to the question of how much is a matter of comfort. Really, that 3 to 6 months is a baseline of what a lot of people would probably feel comfortable being able to go 90 days or 180 days. But for some people, that's not enough. And they still aren't comfortable. And so building into whatever, whether it's a recovery plan or a long-term financial plan, you have to be mindful of how you feel with what you have, because times like these, I forget what the saying is, Mike, you may know, but times don't make the man, they reveal him. I think that this is a time where we have to be honest with ourselves. This is the first time. 08 wasn't fun at all, but 9/11 was a seismic shift, I think, in people's thinking and their feelings. And this is another one. And I think that, for almost everybody that I talk to, their circumstances have changed, whether that is that now their job has changed and they don't have that anymore, or for a lot of people, they've changed. This experience of being home 8 or 10 weeks and they're just not the same person that they were. And so understanding what you're comfortable with in terms of that safety net, but also in risk in your investments and things like that, you have to listen to yourself right now, because for the last 10 years, investments have basically gone up for the most part, and any discussion of risk was irrelevant because it was hard to remember that there was any. And this has been a pretty stark reminder for a lot of people how much risk there is out there and how uncomfortable with that they might be now relative to what they thought they were.
Yeah. You were talking about going through and looking at the kind of things that you might be paying for, the subscriptions, the monthly subscriptions. I go through my own checking account, and I don't use any credit cards, so I don't worry about that anymore. I used to, but I don't anymore. I just use my debit card. But I go through the checking account each month to see what kind of automatic things are taken out, and there was like subscriptions to TV channels that I no longer watched, but I'm paying, $10 a month for that or whatever. You take 4 or 5 of those and you've got a little bit of money that you can play with there.
Or just repurpose it. There's been a big thing over the last 5 years of repurposing, or maybe 10 years of repurposing furniture and repurposing, it really is just repurposing the dollars from things you don't use. Another example, Mike, and this is, again, none of this is advice. This is just food for thought. Is you got a lot of folks who are paying for life insurance now that don't need it anymore. Like they're in a place where they don't need it, but what they do need is long-term care. And so we've seen a lot of people who repurpose, just the concept of repurposing, have redirected into the kind of insurance that they do need. And I think that that's really what we're talking about, because you can repurpose those your TV show dollars into savings or into something else that you would actually use. But kind of the purpose from my standpoint is understanding that not all changes financially have to hurt. And so you can go through, I think that the idea of budgeting is like the idea of diet. Like nobody wants to talk about that. But what you can do is repurpose how you handle some of these things in a way that you're being intentional about what you're spending. Because a lot of us over the years, what times like this show us is how that bloat or that creep can come in, where we just stack. And again, we got 4 boys. And so the idea of kind of those little charges that can add up just makes a big difference. And so now you have an opportunity and a reason to go through and cut things. Honestly, if you call most of your service providers, even the ones that if you can make your payments, if you call the cable company, chances are they'll give you the same deal right now that they would with the for a new customer, or all of these. I've seen the insurance companies now that have lowered their rates for current and new customers. It's a good time, again, just to be intentional about your finances and to ask the questions, because right now everybody needs business. And so the notion that that you might be open to make some changes, you may be able to get a better deal right now than you had been.
thinking about it being intentional, I've had folks ask me about how do you form a budget? If someone were to come and sit down with you over a cup of coffee and say, we've been just sort of spending our money and not really thinking about it and all that, but we've decided we need to start living on a budget. And they said that scares us because budget is like the word diet, and it means you can't do things or whatever. I've had people tell me that I don't like that word because it means there are things they can't do, but it really doesn't. It just means you are planning what to do with everything. How would you advise people to begin to start a budget, or what kind of resources would you point them to?
Sure. So the first thing, for example, in our financial planning process, we call it A to B. Point A is where you are now. Point B is where you want to be. And then honestly, if you can clearly define those two things, then it's just math. Then it's literally how fast do things have to occur from a growth standpoint to get from one place to the other. Warren Buffett, for example, can have all of his money in a checking account for the rest of his life and never spend it all. So he doesn't have to take any risk growth-wise. But the key to that, and really the biggest thing, is what we call a reality check. This is, I don't care how much money you have or how long you've been doing this. I just admitted to the fact that I was paying for 2 gym memberships I didn't use. It happens. So again, it's not a judgment thing. Being honest with yourself. So instead of using the word budget, Mike, maybe we say spending plan. And if you look at it that way and use the words as they're said, spending plan, we are deciding how we're going to spend the money. So it's not about I'm out of control, all that stuff. You can't change the past. And so taking a look, the first thing I would ask people to do, that I do ask people to do, is just make a list of where you spend your money. What I know is, almost without fail, everybody has money that when you sit down and you review your checking account, your debit card, your credit card, there's money going somewhere that you didn't remember. It's not that you didn't know, it's just that you didn't remember it was going to a certain place. And so just by being clear and understanding what those things are, is for everybody has a budget. You have a budget. It's just whether or not you intentionally set it. And so the budget is really just what you're spending. And my encouragement to people is just to start there, just so that first that you know. And then you can start making value judgments on whether or not certain things are still kind of if the juice is worth the squeeze. Do I really need unlimited data? I'm paying for it. Now I can tell you, I got 4 boys, teenagers. I need unlimited data, but not everybody does. Or again, all these kinds of things. You know how it is, Mike. Certain things are just more important to you than others. Yeah. And so if I were going to curb my spending on some things, I would be okay with doing that. But others, I don't really want to. I can cut out 100% of my spending on Gamecock football tickets. I don't have to worry about that. Now, if I have to cut out, Clemson or the cable company, these are just, but then you're making intentional decisions. And I think that's the start of it and the most important thing.
Okay, good. As part of that, people are also talking to me about, we have decided, a family will come and sit down with me in my office and say, we've decided that we need to get out of debt. What advice do you have? They would ask me, so I'm asking you, if you were in that room, what advice would you give people who decided they wanted to finally get out of debt and live debt free?
Well, if the goal is to get completely out of debt, it's hard to argue with. Dave Ramsey and I don't agree on everything, but his debt snowball, it works more than, it's not necessarily mathematically the best way to do it, but it is one of the most effective ways over the last 20 years that I've seen. And essentially what that is to list your bills in order in terms of the payments and the amount that you owe, and start to pay off the smallest ones first, and then you add the payments as you go to the next one. That's the idea of the snowball, because that lets you feel successful, whether it's a diet or a budget or paying down all our debt. One of the biggest kind of allies that we have is motivation and momentum.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's really kind of what it is, is designed to do, and it works really well for that. I would say though, Mike, that the biggest thing is not to use short-term debt or long-term debt for short-term problems.
Yeah.
Going out and you'll have a lot of folks talking about refinancing. This is in a lot of cases for people who are looking to save money and assuming that your employment situation is stable. This is a great time to at least consider. I know Ray Taylor and those have helped me with a lot of stuff, and making sure that, again, what you're paying is valuable, but you also want to be mindful not to roll in things to a long-term note, even at a cheaper interest rate, that aren't going to be here for that period of time. So working with somebody that you trust and making sure that your debt is, from a pay down standpoint, you definitely want to just, I think that the snowball works very effectively. But in looking at debt in general, you want to be mindful. And my suggestion, whether it's a financial advisor or a mortgage person like Ray or somebody like that, is to get some good advice on kind of how best to structure that individually, because it can get a little bit complicated.
Yeah. Yeah. Ramsey says the reason why he uses the debt snowball is that he says his basic thing is that our debt is not so much a money problem as a behavior problem.
For sure.
And that,
100%. The best financial plan is the one that you'll do.
Yeah.
And so it is, like I said, it's not mathematic. There are a lot of ways to do things, that there is a best way mathematically. But the fact is that we don't live in spreadsheets.
Right.
And so we have to figure out ways that you will actually do those things.
Mm-hmm.
A financial advisor, Mike, in a lot of cases, that's exactly what it's all about. It is not only behavior modification, but also kind of that second opinion to check that emotional gut check, because in times like these, fear can take over, and you can make long decisions that have long-term impact based on short-term feelings. And that's why, it's good to get good counsel from somebody kind of in all areas of your life, but money is definitely included in that.
Yeah. Jesus talked more about money than any other subject. I mean, it was not always the word money, it was possessions.
Sure.
The Greek word was mammon, which meant possessions, money, any kind of things that you gather and you save and you work for. What would you say is the relationship between a person, between money and spirituality?
Well, I mean, I would say that they're completely linked all the time. That money is or how we deal with money is definitely a reflection of what's going on the inside.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the areas that there are a lot of for those of us who are believers in my line of work, there are lots of places that we could point to about the importance of investing. But I think more importantly than that is getting into really being intentional. And I think it's in the second half of Matthew 6 where we get the messages about where your treasure is, there will your heart be. And again, I hesitate to quote scripture just because I don't like to get the words wrong, but something to that effect. And the truth is, if you ask anybody about their priorities, you can, the old saying goes, if you want to know what somebody really cares about, look at their calendar and their checkbook. And I think that is definitely evident. And so I think that's important. I think right now, though, the other message about money and finances and spirituality that I lean on a lot, and I encourage other people to, is that it is on down after that in Matthew. It talks about, the birds of the air and how God takes care of them, and not being anxious and not having to worry. And I think that right now we're in a season where if we watch too much television, if we get the wrong set of inputs, it's easy for anxiety and worry to take over. And so I think that focusing on being mindful that how you spend your money is a reflection of what you've got going on the inside, but then also extending that to those who are afraid right now, and understanding that our faith says that God has clothed the lilies of the field and the birds of the air, and they don't worry about the things that we do. Kind of, he's got our back. And sometimes it's hard to remember that when you're going through tough times.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really what I would point to, more so than any of the other things that are a little more, I don't know, investment or money specific.
Yeah. Good. Good. Any other words of advice you would give on the folks who'll be watching this?
So the biggest thing is not to make emotional decisions. Nothing, very few, I should say, decisions have to be made immediately. And it's really easy right now to let, the feelings that we have get in your head or get in your soul to some extent and freak you out. Don't make long-term decisions, because a lot of decisions we make now can have long-term consequences. Cashing out retirement plan and those kinds of things can have long-term effects based on short-term decisions. I would just tell, and one of the things that I tell my clients, Mike, right now, is that it's easy to feel like we've never been here before. We've never been through this before. I'm sure you've heard that. Okay, what I remind people is that that's not true. Okay, the easiest experience to lean on in tough times is our own. So this is the advice that I would have. First is, think about a time when you've been sick or ill or dealt with somebody who was dealing with a tough illness. Chances are you found some ways to get through that. If you're sitting here watching this, you've gotten through that. Write that down. Second thing is, think about a time when you had money trouble. And money trouble is different for different people. But if you're here, you've been through that. Write it down. And then the third time, you've been alone or afraid. Because that's the thing, Mike, that's killing people right now, in my opinion, is that you take all of that, and then the only inputs you get right now, because you can't be out around the people that you care about as much, is what you get sent on TV. And so we've all been through a time when we've been alone or afraid, and we've gotten through that. We've developed coping mechanisms for all of those things individually. What seems unique now is that we're dealing with all of them at the same time. And so by taking a look at those things, I think, and we have a worksheet that I've given to clients called a COVID comeback plan that basically is walking through, but it's those three things, and then figure out what you need to do in the next 30 days. Because it's hard right now to have visibility for 20 years. Hopefully you have a longer term plan, and you certainly should have one. But the key to making good decisions right now, I think, to put it in football terms, would be to get a first down. But for now is to have a 30-day plan. How do I get myself comfortably through? What do I need to do in the next 30 days? And then see where we are and be able to make kind of the next right decision after that.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Chip. All that's really good advice for me and for everybody who'll be watching this. I really do appreciate you taking this time. Thanks for everything you do for this community. I know that you and Signature Wealth really are involved in this community, and you do an awful lot of good, and I'm appreciative of it. Thanks for spending some time with me today.
Absolutely. And Mike, I would point out, if anybody wants a copy of that COVID comeback plan document, or we've got a couple of other resources about, kind of what do I do if I lose my job? What kind of a couple of checklists, kind of financial relief might be available to me. If they just want to email me, Chip at Signature Wealth, and just put Highland Park in the subject line, then I'll be happy to. You don't have to sign up for a mailing list or anything like that. I'd be happy just one-on-one to send it to them, and they can certainly make use of those.
All right. I'll have it, Chip at signaturewealth.com.
You got it.
Highland Park in the
subject line, and if they want to write a message, they can. But if not, I'll send the COVID comeback plan document, and if you want any other of those, just the financial checklist, we'll call them. Just let me know and what you'd like, and I'll send it to you. Happy for you to have them.
All right, I will put that up along with this and give people that opportunity. Thanks for offering that.
Happy to help.
All right. Thanks for being with me today.
See you soon, Mike. Thank you.
All righty.